Hey everybody, welcome back to Vanta EDC. It has been a little bit. I apologize for those of you that have been keeping track of my channel closely in real time and haven't been seeing any uploads in I think over a week. I have been in the process of moving, so yeah, it's just been busy, but now I'm back to it. So in a different room, the audio probably sounds a little more echoey. We will try to get that fixed eventually, but yeah, I just wanted to get some videos out because I've already fallen behind on that. So anyway, yeah, thanks for sticking with me if you're with me now. So this is my ProTech Mordax. In particular, this is my Blade Show Texas 2023 version. I have number 18 of 100. It is in Magna Cut, and yeah, it's got a 3.5 inch long drop point blade, flat grind, Magna Cut steel, as I mentioned, 63 HRC for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. The handles, the handle is 4.625 inches long. It's got made of anodized milled aluminum scales, and the overall thickness is supposed to be 0.50 inches. So why I got this knife? Well, for those of you that again have been following my channel for any amount of time, probably know that I'm on the quest for the ideal button lock, the ideal EDC button lock, that is. And so this is a knife that I've heard a lot of good things about before getting my hands on it for myself. And I ended up going to Blade Show Texas 2023. That was my first show ever, my first Blade Show, all that stuff. First time getting to see a lot of knives in person. And this was the knife of all the exclusives at the show that I was most interested in. I'm not gonna lie, I honestly was not super interested in, but I'm glad I ended up picking it up because it ended up being my favorite pickup from the show by far. And so, yeah, this is a premium button lock. It's also American made because it's a ProTech. And another thing that really drew me to this one is that the fact that ProTech has come out and said that their Magna Cut, they're heat treating to 63 plus HRC, which is considered the optimal heat treat for Magna Cut to get the best performance out of it. So yeah, I'm not a blade steel snob or expert, but at the same time, I figured, if I'm gonna get Magna Cut, might as well get it done well. So yeah, lots of things on paper that drew me to wanting to buy this. So I did buy it, and I'm really glad I did, as I mentioned before. Overall, my experience with this, I carried this a lot. It's been just under 2 months, right? Let's see, March, April, May. Yeah, just been under 2 months since Blade Show Texas when I bought this. And so I carried this a lot, probably the first few weeks, month after getting it. And the only reason really it's been getting basically no slash little pocket time is because I got this guy right here. Even before this, I got this one right here, which I'm no longer carrying because I have this one. But the CJRV Echo, this has been like ruling my pocket far and away above any of my other knives. And so that's another video, another conversation. All that to say, it's not to say that this knife is bad or disappointing or anything like that. It's more just I've found a knife that I honestly may like more overall. But again, we'll get into that when I do some other videos. So even still, this is a great knife. One thing that there's a lot of things on paper that made me kind of wary before actually handling and buying this knife. One of them is the overall size, including the blade length and the weight. But I think ironically, it's the size and the weight of this knife and the blade that make it, that provide some of the most appealing aspects of the experience. So unlike a lot of, I generally, for an EDC knife, I tend towards knives that are around 3 inches long blade and under 3 inches in overall weight. Now this is 3.5 inches long of blade, and it's like almost 3.75 ounces, I believe. And so it's significantly larger than my ideal, quote unquote ideal EDC knife. But what that means in this particular instance is that this has a much more satisfying, authoritative deployment. That's the best term I can use, or best term I can think of at the moment is authoritative. It's just, you hear how snappy, how hefty that blade is, and then how how easily it closes, partially because of the weight of that blade as well. So yeah, and another thing that I hadn't thought too much about before buying it, but that I really think is one of the kind of the greatest strengths of this knife is the ergonomics of it. It just really melts into your hand because of the blade choil and the handle choil, and also just the overall profile of the handle. So it's been really good experience with this knife overall. I like the fact that it closes reliably, even if you only disengage the lock but release the button before it's closed all the way. It just wants to close on its own. So it's fun because it kind of simulates the whole drop shuttiness of like a frame lock or a liner lock that a lot of people value or enjoy. So I like that. And it just makes it reliable. You don't have to worry too much about it sticking if you only partially close it or whatnot. So it's just going to go as long as you don't get in the way of it. So yeah, now I'll get into some of the small details of this design, the things that I like about this design. And of course, some of this is going to be specific to this version, this particular version, this Blade Show Texas version that I have, but a lot of it will also be just more broadly relevant to the Mordax as an overall model in this current iteration, I should say. So, and the reason I say current iteration is because there was an earlier version that was released in collaboration with Drop, and that had a 20 CV blade. The blade profile was different. I don't know what else was different, but I think those were the two biggest differences I can remember is the blade steel difference and the overall like grind and like thickness of the blade maybe. So yeah, this is the more current iteration, which has a thinner blade stock or at least a higher grind. And what was the other thing? I'm totally drawing a blank. The blade and senior moment right there. Okay, whatever. Anyway, yeah, so this current iteration, so one thing I like is this milling pattern. This milling pattern I think is a really good choice, kind of in particular the size that they decided to make the individual hexagons here. This they call this the honeycomb pattern. So the individual hexagons, the overall size, and also the distance between them, it provides really good amount of it's like the perfect balance in my mind of tactility, but it's also like they definitely knock down the edges of the hexagon so that it's not like sharp at all. But it's just I'm not worried. Like if I'm pressing down into this, I'm trying to right now I'm pushing down into the knife and forward, and right now my thumb doesn't want to move. So I think that's it's one example of just how good this milling is, both in function and I think in form. I like that, they create this it's inset, and it's bordered here, so it doesn't take the entire scale. I like that effect, that aesthetic of it. I don't like it. I wouldn't like it as much if it were to cover the entire scale from tip to butt. So yeah. Another detail that's specific to this version is I like this Mosaic pin button. So I don't know exactly how they make it, but as you can see, it's got this very Art Deco look. It's got this gold brass color to it. So I think they're brass pins. I'm not 100% certain, but I think they're brass pins that are, I guess, inlaid into some sort of like Mosaic bar stock, and then they cut it up. So anyway, I think it adds a cool effect. It matches, it kind of complements the color of the ProTech branding here, so it gives it some pop. So yeah, that's another small detail about this particular version. Other versions, depending on which one you get, are just a solid color button, or like the California Custom Knife Show. I think I would have liked to have that version more because it has the abalone inlaid button, and so this is still great, but I definitely think if I could pick, I would have picked the abalone button personally. Now, another thing that I had mentioned earlier in some way is another aspect, small detail that I like is this finger choil, and it, to a greater extent, the ergonomics of this knife. This finger choil is a perfect size. When I'm really pressed into it right there, I'm not worried about pressing into the edge of the blade too much that I'm at risk of cutting myself. It's got a good depth to it. It's not, I feel like some knives that I have, the finger choil is really shallow. This is not my knife technically, but my wife's pyrite, but I do have a pyrite. The pyrite choil is a little shallow. It's not terrible, but it's definitely more shallow. Then you notice the difference there basically. And so, I like the depth of the choil because it makes me feel a little more confident, really bearing down, really tightly gripping in that area, not worrying about potentially slipping up onto the edge of the blade as much. And so, yeah, the finger choil is great. And it is, they didn't chamfer it a ton, but it is somewhat chamfered. Like it's not razor sharp on either side, transitioning to the sides of the blade, but it's also, it could be more rounded down for greater comfort if you prefer that. So, yeah. Now, I've also mentioned this already, but just another detail that I like about this knife is the fact that, and I'm assuming it's largely because of the weight of the blade, but also because of how well engineered the tolerances of this knife are in the pivot around the pivot. But this this blade just wants to go. It just wants to go down when you disengage the lock, and it's a really satisfying feeling whether you do that slow. So if I like only partially disengage it and then just like that, it just goes on its own. I really like that aspect. It's kind of trivial and kind of, not functional necessarily, but it just makes it as, because for me, in all reality, the primary function I get out of my knives is fidgeting with them. And so it makes it way more satisfying to fidget with, just being able to do that and like let it slow drop as if kind of simulating it was like a frame lock that's drop shutty. So I like that. Another detail that I like the blade thickness. So it's not the thinnest blade ever, but for a knife of its size, being like a 3.5 inch long blade, it's got 0.125 inch thick blade stock. So, and on top of that, the grind is very, the flat grind is very high. The primary bevel goes really high. So it makes for a very slicey blade for a knife of this size. So I definitely appreciate that about this knife. And that's, I think, like, that was one of the differences that came with the more current iteration of the Mordax. So, yeah. One thing that I didn't think I would like, but I do really like is, or I guess it's not that I like it, but it's not nearly as much of an issue as I thought it would be, is the thickness of the handle overall. So it's 0.5 inches thick. There's some knives that I have, like this Echo, I think it's like 0.42 inches thick, which is definitely on the like even skinnier than average for skinny handles side, but all the same, I definitely prefer skinnier knives over thicker knives just because of they're sitting in my pocket so often. I want them to be comfortable and not be as noticeable, not protrude and cause much of a bulge in my pocket. And so I thought this would be more of an issue with this one because it's 1/2 inch thick, but I think it must be partially because of how wide the overall profile of the knife is when it's closed, and also the fact that it's pretty deeply chamfered around all edges of the scales. It sits a lot more comfortably in pocket than I would have thought personally. Now, some people might feel like from the get-go it wouldn't be that much of an issue, especially if you're a bigger guy or whatever. You don't wear tight jeans, don't have tight pockets, but for me, that can often be an issue. And so I like this handle profile, despite the fact that on paper it's a little bigger than I prefer. Another thing that goes into kind of the ergonomics, I would say, of the knife that I really enjoy is specifically the profile of the end of the handle, the butt of the handle here. I like how rounded it is. Now, I like the overall shape of this knife because for me, I do like having a mixture of angles and more defined lines, but I do like having a little bit of curvature, a little bit more of an organic look to it. And honestly, I don't know if I actually made this connection before, but kind of there's this sort of not mirrored, but like inverse effect of the depth of the belly on the blade and the angle of the curvature on the butt of the handle here. I really like that sort of complementary visual effect. And so, but even more so than that, what I appreciate is that when I'm gripping it hard, when I'm gripping down low especially, when the butt of the handle is in the meat of my palm, it's not too sharp, it's not too sharp, and it's sloped enough to where it really comfortably fits in there without creating a major hotspot. And then on top of that, not that this is a practical common grip, but like just fidgeting and having it in this reverse grip like this, it creates this really natural, comfortable thumb ramp right here. In fact, it might be too much of a thumb ramp because then you can't necessarily wrap around the tip very well, but the tip of the butt very well. But all the same, I think the profile of the handle, and particularly at the end, they're really organic, really comfortable to handle. Another detail that I like that ProTech thankfully does with a lot of their current designs is creating, whenever they have milled scales, they leave a part of the scale unmilled. It's kind of hard to tell from here, but they leave a part of the scale unmilled and leave it smooth there, so that when you're slipping it in and out of a pocket, it is going to create a lot less friction than if it was rubbing between the clip and these grooves here. Because as I mentioned, there's a lot of friction here, especially with more pressure. And so, it's smart. It's nice of and if you're looking straight at the knife, you almost can't tell. You wouldn't know for a fact that there's anything there, other than the fact that you can tell that these hexagons are cut off. So it's nice that they do it in a way that isn't like taking. It's not annoyingly noticeable, but it blends into the overall design of the knife. So yeah, another thing that I like that I think ProTech does generally on a lot of their newer designs, their current productions, is the head of the clip that attaches, the part of the clip that attaches to the actual knife is inset. And so if you look here, there's no protrusion there. It's not going to catch on the lip of your pocket when you're putting the knife in. And then along with that, the heads of the screws are also inset, so that those also are not protruding. So double whammy, they did a good job just making sure that it's low profile. There's no extra snag points or catch points for when you're pocketing the knife. And then the last thing I'll mention is I like how subtle the lanyard hole is here. It's just this little channel that is milled into both halves. And so then when you join the two halves of the scales, it creates like a little channel there. Let's see, I have like a little zip tie here that I can can I put it through to demonstrate? I don't think the plastic wants to bend that much, but yeah, I can't really manipulate. I'm not going to try that hard, but basically, yeah, it's out of the way. As someone that doesn't use lanyards ever, I appreciate that it's out of the way. It's also, very subtly built in. It's not catching anything really. The edges are chamfered enough to where it's not snagging too hard on anything or uncomfortable there. So yeah, lots of great little details, lots of things I like about this knife. I'll get into the things that the issues that I had, which is very few, and the things that I'd personally like to change or that I just dislike about the design personally. So the only issue that I had with this so far is that the pivot screw walks. And so for context, I can't remember what happened when I first undid the pivot, but I've never fully disassembled this knife. I've only literally removed the pivot screw just to apply Loctite and then to retighten it. So I can't remember if there was Loctite from the factory, but even if there was, it started walking loose. I mean, for the first few weeks, especially that I had this knife, I probably got a good 200 to 400 deployments in a very short amount of time, just because I was so addicted to it, really enjoying the experience of carrying it and opening it and closing it. So I think my hypothesis is that because this blade is so heavy, and it therefore gets a lot of momentum into it when you deploy it with any amount of speed. It's just rattling. It's like rattling the screw loose very slightly over time. So even though I applied Loctite and let it cure for 24 hours, more than 24 hours, I'm pretty sure, before ever opening it again, really, it still walks loose every so often. So that's where having, this on me at any given time when I'm out and about is nice, just because I can just quickly tighten it on this T8 pivot here. So it's not the end of the world, especially since I'm only really just fidgeting with the knife. I'm not actually depending on it to be this, almost like a fixed blade lockup type of knife. So Yeah, but that is the one major issue I've had, and I've actually seen someone else in the ProTech Enthusiast Underground, or ProTech, yeah, something, whatever the name, official name is, but that Facebook group, someone else mentioned specifically, complain about that specific issue with their Mordax. So it sounds like it might just be innate to the design. Maybe they don't apply enough Loctite or any Loctite out of the factory. So, it's not something that bugs the crap out of me, but it's also something that I think could be easily remedied through several means. So, yeah. Now, the things that I would change, really the only major thing that I would, well, I shouldn't say the only major thing, but the most major thing I would change, this is more of like what I feel like is a missed opportunity more than anything else, is the lack of a second deployment method, or actually not second deployment method, but because if you consider the button a deployment method, but this is a flipper only knife in a sense, right? And so for me, and this is again not true for everybody, but for me for sure, as someone who likes to fidget with his knives more than anything else, having a button lock knife with multiple deployment methods is significantly more enjoyable than having one with just one dedicated deployment method. And I can say that now because having had this, as I mentioned earlier, is this Echo having a front, just the fact that it has two deployment methods, a front flipper and a finger slot, gives me way more options to just fidget around with, and it's hard for me to keep my hands off that knife in a way. So if this had like either a finger hole or honestly a thumb stud on both sides here, I think this would be competing with the Echo even now, even though the Echo is the newer, shinier knife for me. I think this would be competing for a lot of pocket time because I just would want to keep fidgeting with it all the time. That's really a big reason why I keep the Echo in my pocket so much nowadays, is because of how fidgety it is. I mean, it's also a great slicer, so I don't want to take that away from it, but the fidgetiness of it is definitely factor number one for me. And so I think there was just a missed opportunity here. I'm kind of curious if the Ferrum Forge guys or the ProTech guys consider that with this current iteration, or if they're trying to keep it pure to its roots for the most part or whatever. But yeah, I can talk about that a little bit more later. Now, another thing that I would change that I don't think is absolutely necessary but would be nice is having some level of jimping here, especially because it is a thinner blade stock, so you don't have as much surface area for your thumb to engage with on the spine of the blade, but it's still very usable. It's not like a major issue. Another thing that I think for them, it's only an issue if you are like me early on fidgeting with this like crazy, is the texturing on the flipper here. There's only 2 grooves here. You can see that right there. There's only 2 grooves, and they're kind of large. And so the way that they're designed, it kind of ends up creating, like if you keep flipping it this way, whether you're push buttoning it or light switching it, it is going to wear down on your fingertip. But that's more of an issue if you just fidget way too much like I do. So some people would not even worry about it. It does give you great traction though, so that's obviously important to just have a guaranteed interaction with the flipper every time you want to. So yeah. The other thing that I would change is, and this is a personal preference thing, is I would like to have the blade shape be some sort of sheep's foot reverse Tanto Warncliffe, and that's purely for the utilitarian aspect of it. Now, the way that they designed this knife, if you were to do that, it would have to be a significantly shorter blade because of the way that the blade length goes all the way, when it's closed, goes all the way into the curvature of the handle here. So practically speaking, I don't know if that'd be worth it to shorten the blade that much by making it like a, one of these flatter edge type blades. But personally, I just like the utilitarian aspects of those shapes. So that's a personal preference thing. Now, one thing I noticed actually right before recording this video is that all the screws except the pivot are T6. Now, that's not necessarily a huge gripe for me personally, but I know that can be kind of a big gripe for a lot of other knife people. So, for the stop pin has screws on both sides actually, and then there's the two clip screws, and then this one body screw here. All those are T6. I checked earlier, so only this is a T8. So, that might be a big deal. I doubt it's a deal breaker for anybody, but it's might be a bigger deal for some people than others. Now, One thing that I don't think you would necessarily notice unless you were trying to look for it is the milling, or just the way that they cut out this pocket for the button to sit. The edges of it right here and here are actually very sharp. They did not really what would you call it? Yeah, they didn't chamfer them. They didn't like grind them down at all to make them smoother. So I actually can kind of catch. You can hear that. That's like the skin at the edge of my thumb catching on the edge of this pocket. So it's not the best, but at the same time, in reality, you're not really interacting with that because you're just depressing the button, and you're not like you're probably not dragging your finger. Yeah, you can't really like drag your finger down towards that as you're depressing the button. So I doubt it really affects most people's experience, but it's just one thing that I've noticed over time is that it just isn't milled all the way around the way most of the other parts of this knife are milled down nicely. So, or chamfered, whatever. So yeah, the last thing I'll quote unquote complain about is just the location and the size of the branding. And this is not specific to the Mordax, but this is more just a general thing for most Pro Techs, especially the ones that are not in the Operator series. But like the size of this branding is decent, and then it's kind of farther up. And what I actually also noticed just before recording this video is that like when you close it, the branding is like partially obscured, like not terribly, but it's partially obscured under the scales here, which to me is like, wouldn't you want it to be more visible, like perfectly visible when it's closed and when it's open? Because obviously when it's open, there's no issues of any obstruction there, but when it's closed, it's very easy to just shift this over a little bit. So it's kind of curious to me. I think one of the downsides to having the exclusive version is you have all this text and stuff to denote the where it was an exclusive for, the number, all that stuff. I would like to maybe have like a shortened, like an abbreviation of Blade Show Texas and the year, and then obviously it's nice having the number of which number knife it is. That's nice, but it is a little larger than I'd prefer. So I'm a minimalist, but in terms of my personal preference and philosophy, so any sort of branding generally kind of goes against my personal tastes, but that's again a personal thing. All right, this video is getting long, so I'm gonna just shut up soon. Basically, the only other details that I'll say is not details, but the only other thing I'll mention is like, as far as I know, they don't make any button locked versions with titanium scales yet. I think that might be cool, but it would make it a heavier knife. Right now, I think the unmilled version, I think is like 3.85 ounces. So this is, I think, closer to 3.6 something ounces, which depending on who you are, maybe that matters, maybe that doesn't. For me, that's probably beyond like a higher weight than I would care to carry, actually. So in some ways, even though the aluminum, at least in my head, aluminum kind of feels like a cheaper alternative to a titanium scale, I think in practicality it's great to have this in aluminum because it's pretty lightweight. Now I will say that ProTech, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a Ferrum Forge decision or ProTech decision, but they don't mill the inside of these scales at all. So if they were to do a titanium version, they could just mill it out and it'd probably be pretty much the same. So that would be nice, but not a big deal. All right, so last thing I'll say is kind of my own plans with this knife in particular and with the Mordax in general is, it's funny because I'm definitely someone who wants to carry all the knives that I choose to own. But because of how rare this is, it's getting harder for me to justify doing that because, this is a 1 of 100 knife. And, if I were ever, it's just definitely possible, if I were ever in a situation where I need to sell some knives, like this would be one of the knives where I could get the most value back and, it would be very easy to find a buyer. So it is tempting for me to just want to put this on total ice. But because of the sentimental value nature of it and because it's a good knife, I don't see myself putting it on the chopping block anytime soon, if at all ever. So, which I don't know if that sounds too paradoxical to what I said in it before that. But yeah, so I really like this knife. Like, this is a great knife and a great design. But, some of the things I mentioned that I changed, really, honestly, the biggest thing and the only thing that would really matter to me is I'd want to get a user, like a more general production, not general production, but like a more general, broader production version of this Mordax with the milled scales so that I can mod it, because I would really want a thumb stud or a finger slot here. That would make it, as I mentioned, potentially just as desirable for me to carry as I'm carrying this CHRB Echo, which is like what, a quarter, something. Yeah, I think like a quarter of the cost of this knife basically. So yeah, that would be a relatively cheap way to make this knife close to perfect for me. So anyway, that's me. I am hoping honestly to see them come out with a operator version, which is where they have no branding. Thank goodness, because ProTech branding is kind of large. No branding, and then it's like all black with a tritium insert button. So I think that would be really cool, personally, because I like all black knives, and I like the kind of the aesthetic of the operator series that ProTech has going on. So yeah, all right. Wow, this is way too long a video. If you watched most or all of this, good for you. Thank you. Sorry for droning on. Maybe I need to learn how to filter myself more. It's been a while since I recorded one. So anyway, I'll shut up now. See you later.